for this episode.
South Korea shot first. Another powder keg situation going on in the world. The grand chessboard, if you will. And that's the close of our related geopolitical grand chessboard updates posted up at the bottom of Cablegate. WikiLeaks unveils secret State Department cables. And in the rush to make sure I cover everything, I did have a clip covering WikiLeaks. So let's go back and pick up the change.
Finally, it is for the world to see. WikiLeaks has put out 220 confidential documents of the U.S. State Department that show how the U.S. seeks to safeguard its influence around the world. 250,000 American documents. That's what we're talking about. They originate from almost every flashpoint on the map. They lay bare the actions, habits, and misdeeds of world leaders from Afghanistan to Iran, Pakistan, Libya, Russia, and many others. These unflattering portraits will provoke negative reactions and possibly even a breakdown in ties. It is the truth behind the fake diplomatic smiles. It's an unprecedented look at backroom bargaining by US embassies around the world. And now let's take a look at what's come out today and what more is expected over the next few days. Remember, these diplomatic cables between the State Department in Washington and about 270 American embassies and consulates across the world give us unhindered insight.
So as long as we're cleaning up the Cablegate leavings there, we also want to note that it is interesting that, as we had reported to you in previous weeks, that Scandinavian countries, one by one, were pointing the finger at the U.S. for spying on them. Sweden and Norway both. Then, days later, we have this Cablegate. Just adding it to the pile. So let's not get confused. And that closes out our Cablegate geopolitical grand chessboard coverage. And we're going to move now, for the remainder of the show, to the 12/2 News Purge. Watch Us Explode. The December 2nd News Purge, named for our opening track from the Polyphonic Spree, Watch Us Explode, only has a few areas to go through on this News Purge. As you may generally know, longtime listeners know, it's generally a massive list of headlines. But things have been quite busy with life and work and holidays and a cold. But you know, there's always so much in the pipeline. Again, our interview last week with Harry Sweeney, my appearance on groundzeromedia.org with Clyde Lewis on KUFO. And you may also notice that we're just a few short weeks away from the 200th episode of MediaMonarchy.com. So now, having said all that, let's get into the News Purge, and we'll start it with econocrash updates. Iceland faring better than Ireland after they just let their banks fail. Iceland's President Grimson said his country's better off than Ireland thanks to the government's decision to allow the banks to fail 2 years ago and because the krona could be devalued. The difference is that in Iceland we allowed the banks to fail, Grimson said in an interview with Bloomberg. These were private banks, and we didn't pump money in them in order to keep them going. The state did not shoulder the responsibility of the failed private banks. That's the key. Ireland's Prime Minister Brian Cowan said this week his government had discussed an €85 billion, that's $112 billion bailout with the EU and IMF after the country's banks threatened to bring the euro member to the brink of bankruptcy. Iceland's banks, which still owe creditors about $85 million, were split to create domestic units needed to keep the financial system running while foreign liabilities remained within the failed lenders. As a consequence, Iceland is faring much better than anybody expected. How far can we ask ordinary people, farmers and fishermen and teachers and doctors and nurses, to shoulder the responsibility of failed private banks? That question, which has been at the core of the Ice Save issue, will now be the burning issue in many European countries. Now, the hot and cold language within there notwithstanding, it's interesting to note here, the President of Iceland noting, We didn't pump up private foreign banks with phony money and pass off the debt to our poor slaves. That's the difference. Bloomberg also reporting federal employee pay freeze proposed to control deficit. And I'm not sure, this is, this swirls around all our little congressional critters. And the left is this and the right does that, and it's all a dog and pony show. They are multi-generational serial killers and gangsters and banksters who want to keep the game going. 3-card money on the street corner. So this question's battling around, and this actually battles around and even concerns the food safety bill that due to a procedural snafu may be snafu'd. And we can hope. And again, we'll tell you, call your reps. It's easy. So this pay freeze surrounds the quote-unquote Bush tax cuts and, again, all of the yada yada. While it does seem that average folks get really angry at the partisan politics of why can't, we can't get anything done, the other way to take it is we should be damn thankful that they're not getting much done. The less they do, the better off it's going to be for most of us, the average folks. USA Today reporting about 2 million Americans stand to lose their unemployment checks by the end of December after Congress failed to extend benefits Tuesday, threatening to crimp consumer spending in a fragile recovery and critical holiday shopping season. A motion by Senator Jack Reed, Democrat of Rhode Island, to pass an extension on a voice vote fell short. The National Employment Law Project, NELP, estimates extending benefits for a year would cost about $56 billion, but economists say they provide an outsized economic lift because the unemployed spend cash on necessities rather than socking it away. Interesting to note. The Federal Reserve released documents Wednesday identifying the recipients of $3.3 trillion in emergency aid provided at the height of the phony financial crisis, the controlled demolition, if you will. 2 European megabanks, Deutsche Bank and Credit Suisse, were the largest beneficiaries of the Federal Reserve's purchase of mortgage-backed securities, Huffington Post is reporting. More than $290 billion worth of mortgage securities were sold to Deutsche Bank, a German lender. Credit Suisse, a Swiss bank, got more than $287 billion in mortgage bonds. The mortgage purchase program has come under withering criticism by economists and financial experts who believes the Fed's initiative has unnecessarily inflated the housing market and prevented the cleansing that pretty much all experts believe is necessary for a full economic rebound. In addition, the Fed disclosed details of swap arrangements with foreign central banks, the Associated Press reported. We'll also note that banks weren't the only recipients of Fed money. Corporations like Caterpillar, General Electric, Harley-Davidson, McDonald's, Verizon, and Toyota also relied on the programs. And we'll just mention Iceland again and the too big to fail phony mantra. Speaking of the Federal Reserve, we go to McClatchydC.com. Fed wants to strip a key protection for homeowners. As Americans continue to lose their homes in record numbers, the Federal Reserve is considering making it much harder for homeowners to stop foreclosures and escape predatory home loans with onerous terms. The Fed's proposal to amend a 42-year-old provision on the Federal Truth in Lending Act has angered labor, civil rights, and consumer advocacy groups, along with a slew of foreclosure defense attorneys. They're not only asking the Fed to withdraw the proposal, they also want any future changes to the law be handled by the new Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which begins its work next year. We can hardly wait. Hundreds lined up in the Atlanta cold for help heating their homes. More on that from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, AJC.com. And those are the stories we're going to see a hell of a lot more of, unfortunately. A positive note, I think, from ABC News. More than 8 million consumers stopped using credit cards over the past year. The decline stems from a combination of consumer choices and bank actions. An analysis by credit reporting agency TransUnion found that use of general-purpose credit cards bearing MasterCard or Visa logos or issued by Discover or Amex fell more than 11% in the third quarter, compared with the July to September period last year. About 62 million people now have an active card, compared with 70 million 1 year ago. Cut up your credit cards. Cancel your cable subscriptions. Cancel your corporate media news subscriptions. Grow your own food, make your own media, put on your own plays, write your own stories, cut your own hair. These are the things that will be the revolutionary acts as these things progress.